4th. You guys ready? Showtime. Okay, great. So we're going to call to order the, on Tuesday, December 4th, Finance and Warrant Committee meeting. We're here at the Public Library, 7:30 start. We're granting permission to the Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. Does anyone else want to record the meeting? No? Okay, with that, we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Before we start with tonight's agenda, we want to welcome Chris Pareda. He is the latest addition. Thank you for joining FinCom, Chris. That rounds out. We now have 15 members again. So we hope tonight's session is helpful to you. The agenda is intended to cover kind of an overview of FinCom. So what we'll talk about is FinCom, kind of how we operate, the town moderator's expectations. We'll get an update from the town administrator, as well as Pam Dukeman. Dukeman will go through some finance background for us. A quick hit, Dottie Powers will give us the ethics, public meeting law overview, and then we'll talk about the town meeting output. So by the end of, in the next hour, you'll kind of get the FinCom 101 overview. But it should be conversational, so please ask questions. The chances are is if you don't know something, then someone else in the committee doesn't know as well.
Can Chris tell us a little bit about himself, because a lot of people might not know him?
Sure.
I don't know my name yet because I don't have a name. But Jane tells me it's on
I
order.
promise, it's coming.
I'd be happy to do that if the chairperson wants me to.
That would be great. We can all go around, but why don't you start, Chris?
All right,
Then Jim.
fine. I was raised in Westwood, graduated from Westwood High School in 1970. I went to college at the U.S. Air Force Academy, served in the Air Force subsequent to graduating for about 12 years. I served as a pilot in the Air Force, rounding out my piloting career as an instructor pilot for the Air Force. Then got out and went to law school. I went to Northeastern Law School after moving back here to the Boston area. After graduating from Northeastern, I clerked for a year for the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and then worked for about 3.5 years in downtown Boston at a firm that was called at the time Bingham, Dana and Gould. It's now gone out of business, unfortunately. And then went from there. I found a home at the Federal Aviation Administration's legal office. Their regional office is located in Burlington, Massachusetts. So I moved there, sort of a marriage of my legal education and my military aviation training, and served for the FAA for 25 years, rounding out my career there, managing that legal office. Retired from the FAA in 2015, and since then I've been occupying myself as a part-time flight instructor at Norwood and at Bedford, and also continuing to practice a little law on the side. So,
Cool.
bless you.
Thanks, sorry.
That's all right.
No, I just thought other people.
No,
did
it's-
not.
yep.
His wife is the nurse at the high school.
Oh.
A couple, two kids or three kids?
I'm sorry?
2 kids or 3 kids from the.
My wife and I have 3 kids, 30, 31, 34. Today's her birthday, and 37. 2 of them live in the area, and one of them works for the Florida House of Representatives. He's the staff director for the Standing Committee on Redistricting in the state of Florida. A popular subject down there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, up here, it isn't that controversial, but the word gerrymandering came from Massachusetts. But that's a fashionable target in Florida.
Interesting. Well, thank you, and again, welcome.
Thank
It's
you.
great to have you and your experience. Jim, do you want to just start kind of a quick round robin so Chris has a sense of
Yeah,
us?
Jim Ferraro. I'm from the Downey School area, Phillipsbrook Road. Been in town for about 20 years. Have 2 children, 12 and 16, and I'm also an attorney with a solo practice in Cambridge.
Yeah, I should mention I live in World Circle too, so I'm also in the Downey area.
Ellen Rawlings. I live on Green Hill, grew up on Farm Lane, so I'm also a lifer. So I've been in town pretty much off and on for 30-odd years. I have a daughter at the Sheehan. I work managing software testers for a company that kind of employs people who are on the spectrum, so neurodiverse workforce. It's interesting. I think that's about it.
Hello, my name is Mike Powers. Been in town about 25 years now, raised 5 daughters.
All by yourself?
Well,
That's
a lot of
already.
Absolutely not. And, retired as a federal employee as well. I ran the Postal Service and just retired about a year and a half ago after 37 years, doing some consulting work now on the side. So, good. Nice to meet you and welcome.
Yeah, I'm Mike O'Hara, live over in Bay Colony on this side of town. 3 kids, all went through the school system here, 17, 19, and 21. Like you, started out as a lawyer, I was at Ropes and Gray. You were probably, maybe while you were at Bingham. And I have been an investment banker in consumer and retail since then.
Lauren Fitzpatrick. I've only been in the town for about 7.5 years. I have 1 daughter. We live on Dean Street, so she's in the Hanlon district. And I actually went to Northeastern too, undergrad and grad school, double Husky. And I did work up at the State House for a little bit, but my career is in supply chain management, so welcome.
I'm Tom Kilgariff. I grew up in Westwood as well. I went to Westwood High, Boston College after that, moved back to Westwood, married, 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, 2 boys in high school, and a daughter at the middle school. I have not raised them myself. I was in the car business for about 25 years, and a couple of years ago got into some real estate development. Welcome aboard, Chris. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Hi, Julie Bride. I have a son in middle school and 2 daughters at Martha Jones. I grew up in Westwood myself, and I graduated. I did my MBA at Northeastern, so it's pretty cool. And I work in health insurance market strategy type of work.
Good.
Hi, Jane O'Donnell. I'm the administrator for the Finance and Warrant Commission, and the other half of my job is Westwood Housing Authority. And we have a middle schooler and a freshman in high school.
I'm Howard Messing, been in town since 1991, raised our family together here. But I'm still growing up, so I'm growing up in Westwood. I'm the CEO of Meditech. We have a couple of facilities in town, and I'm happy to be on this board.
Barb Delisle, been in town for 24 years, was an investment banker in my previous life. Just recently sold my house, and I'm now a renter at the Gables, University Station, and I will take credit for raising my 2 boys,
As you
because
should.
he's not here to say anything, so I had 2
Yeah, see
two
where I
boys,
started?
27 and 29.
Hi, Diane McCarthy. I'm also a lawyer. We have a twin 15-year-olds in Westwood High School, and we've only been in town about 10 or 11 years, so I'm probably the town newbie.
Hi, I'm Peter Lentz. I live on Atlantic Drive. I've been in town for 28 years. Got 2 daughters, 26 and 27. This is my 2nd term on the commission here, and I'm a financial consultant. Thanks for your service, by the way.
You're welcome.
I'm Cindy Buckley. I live on Millbrook Road. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler. We've been in town for about 12 years, and I'm in inside sales. So that's about it.
Hi, George Hertz. I think I'm the senior member of FinCom. Lived in town for 17 years. Have a 24-year-old son who lives with his fiancée in Canton. I have probably somewhat of an eclectic background. I've been everything from budget director from the Commonwealth to running and starting several companies for Fidelity Investments for 15 years. I actually financed and ran the Greatwood Center for the Performing Arts. And was chief of staff at Massport after 9/11. So I've got quite a range of public sector and private sector investment experience, and really enjoy serving on FinCom and starting my another 3-year term, which I really look forward to. So thank you to the moderator for appointing me.
Great. Just one comment for purposes of information sharing. There are 4 new members. So Chris, Lauren, Ellen, and Diane just started this year as well. So it's great to have a full complement. Thank you all. So the first piece of the agenda is for me to talk about, actually, can we go to the second slide, or reverse the order? FinCom and what we're responsible for. So what you see in quotes is pulled from the charter, and the rest will be just conversation around kind of how we work. So we're at full complement with 15 of us representing 15,000 residents of the town. What we're responsible for, as it says, is studying financial and other affairs, budget, capital investments, and others. And what we do is we provide feedback to the town or the committees coming forward about questions, concerns, input, suggestions, and overall kind of what really maybe 15,000 people would ask about if we were able to do that. I think informally, a lot of us get questions outside of this venue, comments at, sports fields, at, coffee shops and different places. So a lot of that does come through in the questions and concerns that we bring forward. We are here to consider all the articles in the warrants for all town meetings. This year, we'll just have the one spring town meeting, but in the past, we've had 2, which is a bit of work. And we're also responsible for reviewing the budget that happens around the same time and produce an annual report. We'll talk about the book later, but a lot of that work is done kind of collectively at the same time. There's the articles, and then there's the budget and capital review. The way that we like to work, before I go to the next slide, is we do have information coming to us, but we think it's also important that we proactively work with the town administrator, the superintendent, to bring forward any questions and concerns, or just ideas, suggestions. So we will continue to ask, and Jane, thank you for that, for you to bring forward questions for an agenda, or in fact, bring forward agenda items where it makes sense, because we think that will make our work actually more productive in the end. So we're shifting to be proactive as well as responding to information that comes to us. So how do we do the work? There's a lot of work in just reviewing the articles, responding to those, and making them available to the residents. So we tend to, when the warrant's closed and the articles come forward, we'll get a first review. Usually at that point, we take ownership of certain articles, so you can start to really drive conversation, listen to other perspectives, so that when we're done reviewing the articles, you feel you have enough information to provide a summary to the residents. So each of us will be responsible for doing that, kind of responding to the articles and explaining how we as a committee have voted. We're organized into subcommittees to really take us through a budget process, and also to be kind of subject experts, if it makes sense. I think there's so much information for us to digest that it's easier to be organized in certain topic areas. As we talked about, those of us that were on the committee last year, at the May meeting when we were reorganizing, we talked about being more fluid in moving through committees, through chairperson appointments and other positions more regularly. I think in the past, we were in committees and kind of stayed in those. So maybe going forward, we'll look to make more changes there. The expectation is that we bring forward kind of objective opinions, that some of us will be liaisons to other committees. That means we'll go and listen to information like at Long Range Planning Committee, bring that back to share it in FinCom. The intent is not to be on another board or committee in voting in any capacity. So we're really an autonomous group that needs to be seen as autonomous and really just liaisons for fact-finding purposes.
Now, that's a change, correct, from the way we operated in the past?
I think it's more of a clarification. Is that fair to say, Jane? I think some liaison roles, George, became more formal as committees got bigger or task force grew. And I don't think anyone's violated anything. What we've done is we've reorganized this year is really for two purposes: to continue to be seen as autonomous. We've defined the role as liaison, and also, quite frankly, to not burden any of us with additional work.
But does that mean we can't serve as an appointed member on another task force?
You can serve as a liaison on a task
I
force.
just want to express a concern about that. The concern is, I think a lot of this, I wish, is Michael here? Because I know there were some legal issues that got raised. One of the things I've noticed, that when you're on, I've been on multiple task forces.
Yep, you have.
The people who take it the most seriously at those task forces are the voting members.
Yep.
So if you have 15, 16, 17 people, it's the 4 or 5 or 7 who are the voting members who frankly are the ones who show up for all the meetings and take it seriously. And I would be a bit concerned that if a FinCom member wanted to serve on a particular task force, or you wanted to appoint him to a task force, that they can't be a formal member. And I just want to make sure, I know there was some political issues in town. I just want to make sure, is that a legal requirement or is that a practice? If it's a legal requirement, I can understand it. If it's a practice, I would raise a concern over that.
Jim can speak to it.
The town council's not here. I'll address it a little bit. The members cannot hold elective or appointed town position. I don't consider a task force an appointed town position, but it's really not my decision to make. That's the.
I mean, elected, I understand, but I know that the selectmen in the past have set up committees and they've appointed individuals who've also been on the FinCom. The selectmen have appointed them to sit on those task forces or those committees.
Right.
And I would be concerned if you're on a FinCom and if you're appointed, but all you can really do is liaise, that's very, very different. So in other words, can the selectmen appoint a member of FinCom to serve as a voting member on one of these task forces, long-range financial planning, some of the special task forces they set up, public safety, all this kind of stuff?
Long-range planning does not vote. They're an advisory, they're totally an advisory committee to the selectmen. We will sit and talk and we just go through things and we don't
I know the public
vote.
safety, though, voted.
The
Public
safety was kind of the first one of the new kinds of.
Public safety
advisory.
voted, and it did and as did Islington Center Task Force.
Right. I think we want to, here's what I understand, we can go back to the notes, is we want to not be in a situation where we're voting here and in another forum, because that seems kind of double stacked, and that starts to question our autonomous capabilities. And I think too, from a pure kind of staffing, I think it's now, Mike, where we landed, that the Board of Selectmen will not be making those appointments. It will be on the chairperson of FinCom to decide who's liaison.
Well, I understand the liaison, but does that mean a FinCom member cannot be appointed? My question is.
Correct. I don't think the Board of Selectmen will be making those appointments anymore.
The answer to that question is they can.
Yeah.
That wasn't found to be in violation of anything. The committees and elected boards where the FinCom can't serve, but on a task force and an advisory committee, they can. The issue, however, as Julianne pointed out, is that as we saw with the Islington, when you and others participated in the process, and then it came back before you, there was a lot of feeling in the community, or expressed feeling in the community, that led to an outcome that people didn't like, and so it looked like you had a double opportunity to vote. And that was what people felt uncomfortable with. So our feeling this year, in the discussion with Julie, is that we go back to the idea of having it as a liaison. I mean, the most important thing on these task forces is voicing your opinion and expressing it and paying attention and participating. The voting is just a formality. Ultimately, you're just voting to recommend something to the Board of Selectmen.
Right, so it's a process issue, not a legal, I understand elected.
Not a legal issue, it's a process.
So it's not a legal issue.
It's an optics issue.
It's a process issue.
And
Okay.
optics.
And we did talk to Tom about it, and Tom advised against having FinCom members be voting members on it. Julie asked me to check, and he said it is not in FinCom's best interest going forward to have, he said the liaison role is a really keeps everything clean. And
So in
right
terms
now.
of long-range financial planning, it can be a liaison, it can't be a voting member.
And that's what they
On
are.
special task forces, a liaison. On public safety, it's a liaison.
Tom
Yep.
said it is in the best interest of the finance.
Long-range
commission.
planning, it's always been a liaison.
Okay.
It's
Because there's
always
no
been.
voting.
They were never voting, and they continue to be liaisons.
I think a perfect example of where the liaisons really work, and you were served in that position, some others, was when we did Westwood Station and University Station. You went to all the planning board meetings, you got all the information, you came back and advised the committee, but you weren't there to vote. And I think that was the best example of what we're going back
And I
to.
think Tom said it's prudent to have whomever the liaison is going back on a fact-finding mission, and then the structure of the role should be for them to come back to report to the FinCom. That's what he said is the most prudent way to be handling it.
Is there a problem with FinCon members attending the public hearings of those task forces and
Absolutely not.
in making presentations and taking a position?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Right.
It's encouraged, yeah. That's it. It's
We
encouraged.
encourage that.
Okay. But it's not a conflict of interest. If somebody from Islington would address the Islington task force, they could do that.
Yeah, they're not a voting member.
Right. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. So just to wrap how we work, we will begin to make the assignments, as I said, with the articles, and then shortly into the new year, as the budget process starts, the subcommittees will begin to digest that. It's my expectation that the output from your articles and the committees is kind of public-ready documents. Jane isn't available to write content. She's available to help with commas, periods, and kind of formatting and editing, but we don't have staff to write content. We, the 15 of us, are the content developers. So we have resources, we can help each other. Jane has access to past documents, we have past presentations, we have a ton of information. So I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed. But the documents we prepare do get delivered and are published, so just to be clear with that. And really, it's writing kind of as you'd explain things to your grandmother, simple, plain language. It doesn't have to get complicated. We really just want to be clear about what we learned in reviewing articles or reviewing budget and what our perspective is, okay? So we can take that as it comes, but I think a lot of people, sorry, for the new folks, sign up that we're a committee that really participates in meeting, but we do have a whole host of work to do offline. So we'll get through that, but I just want to set the expectation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim
Okay.
to talk about.
What I was going to speak on, we've already just discussed, so I'll be very quick. We have an open town meeting here in Westwood, and people have called that pure democracy, which means, I guess, that every town resident who's an eligible voter can go to town meeting and vote, and their vote is the same as everybody else's. That only works because we have a good FinCom. It's really up to you to do the job ahead of time so that town meeting runs effectively. You're independent citizens of the town. Your primary job is to review and vote on the budget, and also any other articles that come before town meeting. And that's how the charter is written. The only one really you're directed to review is the budget. So the way I look at it, you're like the Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives. You'll vote, you make a recommendation, and then the town meeting is the legislature or the House of Representatives. You're all appointed by the town moderator, whoever that is. 3-year terms, it's staggered so that 5 people get appointed every year. There is a requirement that you cannot miss 5 meetings, and some of you may find yourselves in a situation where you're having difficulty making meetings. That's okay, that happens, life happens. Just talk to Jane, talk to Julie if it's gonna be a problem. You can take a leave of absence, we'll replace you with someone else until you're in a better position. But don't just not show up. Be in communication with Jane especially.
We can do call-in.
I was going to ask that question. Are we now allowed, you can do a call-in participation, that counts as attendance?
just
Okay.
can't vote.
Okay.
Yes, but Peter, his
Yeah.
very first meeting. Can we vote now? Oh, okay, you can vote?
We'll talk about that.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
all right.
Peter, his very first meeting, he was away on business for a couple months.
You have a good memory.
And I
Yeah.
think his
3.5
first-
years ago?
We
Yeah.
thought you looked like a
Yeah.
little disc.
I think his
so-
first three or so meetings, Pete, wasn't it? Yeah, a couple of meetings, yeah. He never missed one, so.
I used to attend meetings, and I would be typing notes, and they could hear me typing on the microphone, so I had to mute my phone, so that didn't happen, so just a tip.
Hear a dog barking.
The quorum is 7 members. This is all stuff I took from the charter and the bylaws. Dottie will talk about the public meeting law. My, my job is to try to have a diverse board so that you all represent all the demographics of the town. I'll do the best I can in a town like Westwood. And as you just discussed, if you're on the FinCom, you can't hold an elective or appointed position. I won't belabor that anymore. A lot of this is what Julie discussed already, so we can skip over that. You make findings and recommendations to town meeting. You're going to vote on each article. Try to distribute the report 7 days ahead of time, preferably longer. But even if you don't, that doesn't not invalidate the town meeting. I guess what I'm looking for is just 3 things. My management style is to hire good people and let them do the job. Tell them what the end result is, what I'm looking for. If you've got a better way of doing it than I do, by all means, feel free. Work cooperatively, but you're not always going to agree. Try to understand the perspective of the other side. You don't have to agree with them, but try to figure out where they're coming from. That'll help you and it'll help us as a town. And then finally, I want to talk about a quick story. Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense under JFK. And he was in charge of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Cuban Americans were invading Cuba, hoping to take, there were Batista supporters, they were trying to regain possession of the island. It was funded and supported by the U.S. military, but U.S. troops were not involved. And it was a disaster. And McNamara said his biggest regret was he didn't ask the generals, would they send American troops under the same plan? If he had asked that, they would have said no, and he would have probably gone a different route. So don't be afraid to ask that question. You're hearing people, you're going to get a lot of help from the people here in town government. You have the right to ask for any information from Mike Jaillet or Pam Dukeman or anybody else. You need information, they will get it for you. It says so right in the charter. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Thank you for agreeing to serve. I will stay out of your hair, but if there's a hot issue, I would hope somebody would let me know so that I can do my job as moderator at town meeting. If there's really big controversy, I need to know that ahead of time so that I'm ready, so that our town meeting can operate smoothly. All right? Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Julie, I have a follow-up question, being the moderator. In the
Yeah.
past, I've seen minority opinions handled very differently by FinCom at town meeting, and I wanted to just sort of get, some thought here about it, rather than trying to figure it out at the last moment, because we've had a couple of instances where the FinCom may have voted 13-2 on a very controversial issue, and then somebody in town meeting asks for, well, why did those 2 people vote against it? And it led to some very sticky situations. So just an idea is to talk, how do we handle that? Or rather than waiting for it to happen, in terms of if there's a minority opinion, if it's a contentious issue, because most of the stuff, I think the FinCom finds a way of getting everybody comfortable. We listen to opposing sides, and we say, okay, we listen to it. But there have always been a few where there's some very strong opinions, and then if that question gets asked at town meeting, it really can open up Pandora's box. So.
Right. So I think there's 2 things. There's one, and we all do our best to write thorough explanations on what people read, how much people have read before town meeting or not, we can't control. But I think what's worked well in the past is when whoever's responsible amongst us for writing the response is prepared. Usually someone writes the dissension piece of it, someone writes the affirming piece, and both people are ready to speak on it. I think the question is, do we present both sides or just one side when asked?
I know in the write-ups I've done that I've been asked to include both
Yeah.
sides, and I've been very careful to do it, and I've
Right.
actually had somebody
You've done a good
else
job with that.
sync check, do you think this
Yeah.
reflects what those concerns were? I'm more concerned about how we handle it at town meeting. What's our process philosophy? I mean, do we say that, look, the FinCom vetted this as best we can, our recommendation is 13-2? Or do we end up with a debate in front of town meeting in terms of the pros and cons of the issue? And I'm just,
Or is there a hard number, like 13-2
Right.
isn't a big enough number, but if it was, 7-6,
Right.
right,
then
I'm
it
just
kind
tort
of
of-
warrants it.
I think that's fair.
put it on the issue. I don't know the answer, I just wanted to put it
Yeah,
on the table.
no, I think we should look at that, especially where, to your point, Barb, the vote is much closer.
Yeah, it's just, sometimes when it's just been one or maybe two votes,
Right.
it's been incorporated enough in the main write-up and doesn't warrant a whole separate write-up. And then I also am a little uncomfortable when we're asked to, I'm traditional from when we've done town meetings before. FinCom was not asked, well, who voted for this and, what do they have to say? And I just find that a little awkward.
I'll tell you, from my standpoint, the town charter requires you to have the vote, the numbers, that's all.
Right.
People can ask. People can also come to these meetings. People can watch it on Westcat. I'm not going to make you get up and give your position if you don't want to.
Well, you don't, but I think the tradition more recently on the committee has been that, be prepared, you might have to stand up.
Okay.
It would be nice to kind of have that settled now.
And that'll be your
before we get
decision.
close to the
That's not me.
conversation.
Yeah, let's look at that. Yeah,
All right,
the pros and cons of both.
exactly.
And it may vary with question, too. you
Yeah.
know.
And this is all very abstract. You may change your mind as you're
Yeah.
discussing real articles.
Yeah. Good point,
Mike's
thanks,
up
George.
next.
So which one is it?
Going the other way.
Going the wrong way.
There you go.
Okay. So I thought I'd start out my presentation with an organizational chart. And as all organizational charts, it's not perfect because we're constrained by an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you can't really show all that I'd like to show. But it's from the open town meeting perspective. Open town meetings where all the decisions that drive local government are made. We are fortunate that we have an open town meeting process, and I argue for that. My argument for that is when people feel comfortable with what's being presented at town meeting, the recommendations made by the Finance Commission, and they feel everything's going well, we have a quorum, or we have just the ability to get a quorum. At other times, people come out whenever they think it's important for them to be there, whether they want to be strongly in favor, as we saw at the last town meeting, where 1,000 people came. So we can go anywhere from 175 people showing up to 1,000 people coming out and voicing their opinion. You can't do that in any other structure. The equivalent in other towns, the town council, representative town meeting, city councils, are the same thing as open. And in each instance, they have representatives voting for them. The people themselves cannot express their opinion except at the next election, which is too late if a decision got made that they didn't like. On this organizational chart, it shows the moderator and the appointed boards. Most of those boards are advisory in nature. They're to, except for the permanent building committee, who actively gets involved in overseeing the construction. But the role is to advise town meeting through the moderator's appointment, on action that's going to be taken at town meeting. The Board of Selectmen is the CEO of the of town government, the equivalent of a mayor in a city, say. Town administrator is a CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer. My job is to just make sure the day-to-day operations are consistent with the policy established by my directors, the Board of Selectmen. School committee is kind of reversed. The CEO of the school department is the superintendent of schools, and the school committee is a policy-oriented board that oversees what's going on in the school department. So it's kind of different. There are a lot of communities that have town managers primarily that are titled town manager because they're the CEO, and the Board of Selectmen is the same role as the school committee is here. So different towns have different approaches to this. All the boards, all the committees that come under, all the departments that come under the Board of Selectmen, and I'm responsible for the finance departments, general government, public safety, public works, human services, and land use. In those, there are segments or divisions that carry out the function. Timeline for the town meeting process. I've put on the timeline the dates for this year's process from the Finance Commission's point of view. The Board of Selectmen opened the warrant in November 26th. We're going to close it on January 7th. You are going to have a meeting on the 22nd and 23rd to review with the proponents the articles that they're proposing to get a general idea of what's being proposed. You'll have a municipal budget presentation in February, on February 5th. On March 4th and 5th, you'll have a public hearing for the non-financial articles. This was a decision made long ago. Used to be one public hearing. One Finance Commission chairman decided there will be two. The non-financials were to get the financial articles out of the way. So the second public hearing that's held later in March can focus just on the financial aspects of the community. It doesn't always work out that way. There's always some non-financial articles that move into the second one. It's kind of a cleanup. And in between those two public hearings, you have subcommittee reports. Finally, we go to the annual town meeting. Alongside, and because this is being filmed, I wanted to make the point that a lot of work goes on outside the Finance Commission's meetings and hearings. There's a longer than this even represents budget preparation that goes on in the school department and in the municipal departments that we shoot for. I think it's February 1st to have a budget submitted that's been approved. And then the boards and committees have public information session and public hearings on their proposed articles for town meeting. Zoning board planning board is primarily the one you deal with, but there are others. And the planning board will always submit several articles, hold information meetings, have discussions, and fine-tune through that process what they're going to actually present at town meeting. In fact, as we learned last year, they kept their public hearing open for the FinCom discussion to incorporate any ideas that might have come out of your public hearing. That kind of got them in a little bit of trouble this last year because they should have closed it that night, but unfortunately, the quorum, some of the members had gone home and they didn't have a quorum. The town meeting process. Town meeting warrant consists of two different parts. The first part of the town warrant is a town election. You have nomination papers for open positions that must be taken out and turned in. Ballot questions are possible to be put on the ballot. Then it's followed by the ballot, constructing a ballot with who's running for the position, and an explanation on any of the questions that are being put forward to the voters, an objective explanation of, so both pros and cons it's got to be balanced. Then we hold the election, there's a swearing in at town meeting, and finally, people take the office that they've been elected to, they take office on the day after town meeting, not before. The second part of town meeting is the articles and action on the articles. The process begins with the conception and drafting of the articles. There are standard articles that we have all at the annual town meeting in May. The current operating budget is, first we make adjustments to the current operating budget. If we need to shift money from one account to another, we have to end the year in a balanced budget. So that has to be taken into consideration. In the past, there's a history here. We've not done it, and we stopped doing it the first year I was here. It's that we used to have a special town meeting at the beginning of town meeting, and a special town meeting was to do all the business in the current fiscal year, and then move on to the annual town meeting, which would follow immediately. We just incorporated that into one town meeting and just made sure that those were up front, done first, and then we move on. But if you look at Norwood's warrant, they'll have a special town meeting before. And now the reason why I mention it is we had a few years ago, we had an opportunity where we needed to do some action that we hadn't put into the annual town meeting, and we called a special in advance of the annual, and a lot of people were confused by that, but it's out of that same process. The other standard articles are the appropriations for our operating budget, for our capital budget, and for our reserves. The proposed and somewhat standard articles are also listed: the street acceptances and discontinuance, amendments to town bylaws, amendment to zoning bylaws, purchase and sale of land frequently makes it onto the agenda. Home rule petition, which proposes a state statute to the state or a charter revision to the state that then must be adopted by the state legislature. Acceptance of state statutes. Oftentimes the state will pass statutes and then say it's a local option whether or not to buy in or not. Those we have to bring forward to town meeting. And then petition articles. I want to spend a moment on petition articles because they've become somewhat of a discussion point in recent years. Petition articles can be submitted for annual town meeting by 10 registered voters. It's always advisable to get more than 10 signatures because somebody may say they're a registered voter and kind of find out they're not. The annual town meeting is not only the May town meeting, but the prescribed charter second Monday in November meeting is also an annual town meeting. However, a few years ago, the Board of Selectmen elected not to go forward with that, but elected to go forward with a special town meeting because they needed a different date. That would have required 100 registered voters to sign a petition to get that, to guarantee that that article got placed onto the warrant. And just to make a point, the Board of Selectmen will take warrant articles from boards, committees, staff members, without 10 signatures, but when it comes to the public, they follow state law, which makes these requirements of the number of signatures we can have, or should have, to guarantee that an article gets placed on a warrant. Special town meeting can be called by citizens of the community. 200 registered voters in that instance must sign to call for a special town meeting. We've had 2 instances in my 32 years here of that. The articles submitted on the petition can be oftentimes complicated. The wording can be difficult to write to achieve the goal that the petitioners are seeking. And for that reason, they embedded into the charter in the recently revised revision that petitioners should, they didn't mandate, but they highly recommended that they should consult with town council, with the Board of Selectmen or with the Finance Commission about the wording of the articles before they go get the signatures, because once it's submitted, it can't be changed. And there's a reason for it not being for us not being able to change the wording, whereas if it's submitted by town government, we can. It's that you would have to go and talk to every single person that signed the petition and get them to agree that the change in wording is acceptable, because when they sign, they're signing for what's on that piece of paper at that moment in time, and it's virtually impossible to go back to all those voters and get it done. We've offered to take things off of warrants in the past because somebody wants to not go forward after they've heard the discussion or came to.
Mike, is there any sort of instruction sheets given to people that have said that they are interested in doing an article, like a little guide cheat sheet for them with these explanations?
That's a good idea. Not really, but verbally
I
they're
think it would be a
given.
good idea.
But oftentimes we never hear of it.
Yeah, but
until
but
it
if
happens.
you can all, that's something you can always say, even if nobody takes you up on it. You can say, this is available, and explain like why you can't make the changes and recommend that they go to town council and that sort of thing.
Right.
And then you guarantee that everybody's getting the same message.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the charter tried to do that in a way. So,
Mike, one other point on that, and this has come up, and where citizens have put a petition together, and then they come in front of FinCom, and I don't think they realize for example, if it's something affecting zoning or the planning board, have they been told that you really need to go and discuss this with the planning board first before it gets to the FinCom? Because sometimes they get here and it's like deers, they're in the headlights. They say, well, I thought if I just came to you guys and you guys got it approved. And one of the defenses we've used in the past is, well, it hasn't been vetted by anybody else or other boards and authorities in town. So maybe the little guide sheet you're talking about, if you're submitting a zoning board article, once the wording is in place, but then you've got to go discuss it with the planning board or whatever.
Well, that people know that they have to go early enough, so you have to go to planning board, and before you get your signatures, really,
Right.
you need to do a lot of this work.
Right.
So it would be helpful, I think.
Would you do that verbally, as Mike said, first in the selectman's office, and anytime there's a petition article, we are proactive, they proactively call, tell them, give good advice about what are the steps to take, and then once it comes to me, I do the same thing. So we have, but I think that might be a nice third step, to be able to have something to hand to them. And I know Tom does the same thing when somebody calls and makes
That way you guarantee everybody gets the same information.
Yeah.
yeah.
And actually, a lot of times will come to my office.
Right.
And I refer them to the charter and also to town council and to the planning and zoning board. If it's an article, that would be effective.
I mean, but one of the points we've used, and I'm almost now defending some of the people who've had to come before us, is we've said, well, gee, it doesn't get vetted the same way a town government article gets vetted. So what guidance do you give somebody to say, okay, if you want your article vetted the same way everybody else's is, this is what you probably should do. Maybe you consult with the planning board before you finalize your wording. But I think what happens is people don't quite know what's the process I should go through, and it's, yeah, that's the point, I think, yeah.
I think it is, and it builds some distrust, and what I'm trying to do is address, there's a reason why it doesn't, they often fail, and it's because it is a complicated process, and it is difficult to get something worded correctly to achieve the goal you're seeking. But I will say that, in my years here, I've often seen an article that came as a petition article subsequently do something to change the way, in the direction that was sought by the petition article. Perfect example was several years ago, some of you will remember, there was a proposal to go to a 5-member board of selectmen and to have each of the members come from a different district. Now that doesn't work. I can tell you, you're having one selectman run every year, or 2 selectmen, and to get it on a district-wide basis is just, it can't be done. It can't be managed. And it's not really the way the chief executive office should be selected. If you have a town council with multiple members and you have oftentimes you'll see the town council comprised of 5 members voted at large to get that thought process in the council, and then have council members from each of the districts. That's the appropriate, in the legislative process, that's where you want to have that diversity. In the executive process, on the other hand, that doesn't really work. It would be impossible to manage. Now, that failed, and it failed because of that reason. But it led the next year to establishment of the town bylaw committee, study committee, government study committee. The government study committee, it was the first one in 20 years, and they actually got to a change in the charter, which was the first time in 45 years. So it was very effective in leading to a change, but wasn't the change that was being sought. And had they come and asked for advice, the member I think that was proposing it at the time is one of my selectmen now, they would have, it could have been explained as to why that process wouldn't be the logical process.
The other thing, another point, it's been a little inconsistent about petitioner articles coming to the warrant meetings and making presentations. We haven't always, they always haven't, but then they go to town meeting, make a presentation or something, and I think it would be, it'd behoove them to come before FinCom.
And make a presentation.
Yeah, and that should be made clear that they need to do that as well.
We get this thing to work.
That well. Well, there you go.
I did too much now.
Oh, I know, yeah. We know what we're talking about. Who we're talking about.
This thing's not clicking.
The clicker died.
All right, I'll keep going. You have the printed version. So the public process and refinement. In the Wire, I tried to make this point recently, that town meeting is the night you come to vote on all the articles. Usually it's 35, 40, 45 articles that have to be voted on one night. The public discussion is necessarily going to have to be limited, and the ability to make changes on the fly at town meeting, with everybody needs to be informed that the proposed changes are going to be made at town meeting, makes it so it really ought to be, town meeting ought to be an up or down vote on all the articles, with minor modifications being made and voted on. It's important for residents to understand that the process requires you to participate in the hearing and informational aspect of the preparation for town meeting. So when the planning board is discussing a zoning article, and they're going to discuss how people feel about it, that's the time to influence the wording of the article and the proposal to be made. It's not the night of town meeting. Yeah. That's it.
So is that,
No.
that's what you want?
Yeah.
Is that what you want?
That's it. So people should pay attention that the proponents of the articles have information meetings, they have public hearings, and they make the modifications and bring those forward in articles. And then the Finance Commission does the same. You have informational meetings, you have a couple of public hearings, and then you vote to recommend or vote indefinite postponement of the article. And then you prepare your report and mail it out to all the residents, sometimes with minority and majority rules. I'll just make another point on indefinite postponement. Indefinite postponement, the way the FinCom, the way I look at it, the way I describe it is, your role is a subcommittee of the community, because it's the way we look at you. You're people from within the community that are being, that take the time to learn a lot about each of the specific articles and then express your opinions. So when we come before you with an article and we listen carefully to what you're saying, and then we go back and reflect on it, because you are representing the community, and what we want to do is bring something to town meeting that the community is going to support. we incorporate what we hear from you and what we hear from the audience at your meetings into the final article that we bring forward to town meeting. And that's the most important part of the process in order to get to town meeting, to have up or down votes without having discussion, because it's presumed we're going to have a lot of the discussion before we get to that final point. At the town, and I'll finish with the point I was leading to. When you say that you're voting indefinite postponement, what you're saying to the community is, after spending a lot of time and effort in discussing this article, we think that that article is not ripe for being brought forward this year. We do not think that town meeting should spend a lot of its limited time discussing this article, because we just don't think it's ready to be presented. And the indefinite postponement aspect of it is, this may and can be brought back at a future town meeting when it is better thought through, is what I view the words indefinite postponement mean.
But strictly speaking, it could be an article where we just disagreed with wanting to do it, say medical marijuana, selling recreational pot, and we just vote against it, saying it's not right for this town. And so that gets kind of confused, because, you know, in a case like that, it really is more of a no vote rather than we don't really have enough information, it's not right, come back later. And I think that's where it gets confusing, because, you know, either way, it has to be indefinite postponement rather than no.
But don't you think that's where the majority-minority vote shows?
Yeah.
If you're unanimously voting in favor of indefinite postponement, it's really like a no.
It is like a no, yeah,
Right.
but I'm just saying that it's
Yeah.
really, it's
So,
not like.
I've been here long enough to be able to say this to you. There was multiple times that there was alcohol licensing that was proposed to this town, and this town vehemently and strongly said, we are not that town. We are one of 7, and they're dry, and we will remain so. And a pretty hard delivery here at FinCom and at town meeting. Several years later, we made a determination with a change in population probably, and an interest in having economic development being brought forward. The community overwhelmingly supported petition articles to have a home rule petition to accept liquor licenses. And we said at the time, no, we will never have a place that sells over the counter. And then Wegmans came along, and we decided, well, maybe.
So in the charter, there is a stipulation of when you can bring an article back. Is it just petition articles that can't be brought back?
No, it actually is zoning articles that have to, unless the zoning article is approved by the planning board, it can't be brought back in two successive town meetings. I think that's the right thing. I don't know that there's a restriction on any other article being brought forward. Okay, that's my presentation.
I just never say never.
Yeah, never say never. And
Michael, I have one question for you. Is
Yeah.
there any talk about having another charter commission?
yes, the charter now has embedded in it, in the revised version, that every 10 years it must be re-reviewed, and so the Board of Selectmen is already talking about starting a government study committee to then prepare, to see if there are sufficient modifications to the charter that they then should have a charter commission.
And this is probably more a philosophical point, but how many registered voters are there in Westwood? Approximately. So 11,000. So we can have at town meeting, a quorum is what? We have to have what? 175. So 175, and then we consider it a huge turnout if we get 1,000 people. And I'm just wondering, you know, in today's modern world, the way things are going, you know, and I know Needham has representative town government, but does open town meetings still work in the 21st century? I mean, I know we put it up there as pure democracy, and I agree that it is, but it always worries me when you get a very strong vocal minority showing up that frankly can sway the town meeting, and if it's, 500 people, it's not even 5% of the population. And I've always been a little nervous over that, on some of the issues. And I'll be very honest, what happened at last year's town meeting, one vote, made a huge, one vote on on going through a cycle twice, affected a huge economic development issue in the town. And I'm just wondering, in today's world, maybe in that charter commission, have we outgrown it?
I'm sure they'll take another look at it. They did last time. They were thinking of going to representative town meeting. They decided not to for various reasons. One of the most compelling one was that, representative town meeting doesn't give the voters the opportunity, if they really feel strongly about an issue, to come represent themselves and vote. The other issue was that representative town meeting can be a lengthy process by virtue of the fact that 200 people have been elected and feel the need to say something to justify why they were elected, and that ends up in serious, long discussion. So,
That's the point.
yeah, a lot of towns have been shifting to town council form of government. That's not a prevalent. I think there are probably 10, 15 in the whole Commonwealth. But it is one of the trends that's going forward, is that they're electing town, because you can hold 15 people accountable and have good balanced representation.
So is the trend more towards town council versus representative town government?
It was going towards representative town government, and then that's fallen back, and some of the newer communities are going town council. Some are going to city.
From an open town meeting, though, to a town council, or
Yeah.
not even going the representative route?
Right, and then others are going from town to city government, where it's a city council, and there's no town meeting process in a city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
And I did answer, there were
Yes.
questions, and provided that.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Buckle up for the next presentation. Thank you, Pam, for being willing to come to go
Sure.
through this.
Thank you for having me.
However many years, 5 years later, I still learn something new every time you
Yep.
go through this, so thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I-
Pam Dukeman.
I just want to say that you're my favorite presentation at town meeting.
You're my favorite FinCom person. No, thank you. We work really hard at town meeting to really explain things to people. We want people, the residents, to understand what we're doing with their money, what they're approving, so thank you for that comment. But Pam Dukeman, I'm the finance director for the town. I have responsibility for the overall finances of the town and coordinate the various financial offices, the accounting department, the treasurer, collectors departments, the assessing department. I have two of my key staff people with me tonight, Marie O'Leary, town accountant, and Laura Bukhari, financial analyst. So those are two people that you'll see throughout the year coming into the meeting and helping with the various material that we bring to you. Just a quick note on myself, I've worked for the town for 28 years. I've lived in town a little over 20 years, raised my family here, 2 children, my son, kind of a recent college grad, and my daughter, a sophomore in college. So here tonight to give a quick overview of the budget process. A couple of things I wanted to go through, just a couple of quick things on municipal finance in general. Talk about the budget dates, and then look at the material that we use to take you through the budget process. And then just we have a couple of quick slides on some key financial items just to walk through those. Oops. Okay. Okay. So just in municipal finance, we find sometimes when people come on the FinCom, they have financial background. Municipal finances, it's, a new world, its own little world. We try as we go through material to relate it to corporate finance or your own personal finance. We try not to use municipal terms without explaining them. But if we do that, just ask and let us know. So our fiscal year is from July 1st through June 30th. The finances in Massachusetts are overseen by the Department of Revenue, and we fall under the Revenue Department because of our taxing ability. We actually have to have our tax rate certified by the Department of Revenue. We're not allowed to issue tax bills until they approve our tax rate. We have to report all of our revenue and expenses annually to the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue regulates how we handle our revenue and expenses, what fees we can charge, what taxes we can have. An example is the meals tax that the town adopted a couple of years ago. We can't decide on our own to implement a tax like that. The state has to allow communities to have that. So they'll come out and say, you're allowed to have this tax if you'd like. You have to have local option. You have to go to your town meeting and ask them, and then you can incorporate that tax. So sometimes we'll have it, some won't. So there's just a lot more kind of regulated with what we can do with our finances than you may realize when you first come on board. Department of Revenue oversees the use of debt. They determine what we can issue debt for. They approve all of our town values. They certify free cash. That is a word you'll hear us talk about in the budget process, really retained earnings at the end of each year. We also have an annual audit. We have an outside audit firm that comes on every year on site in the spring and the fall. We produce annual financial statements. We refer to those as a CAFA report, a comprehensive annual financial report. So every year we're producing those. The town does have by charter an audit committee, a 3-member committee of residents appointed by the Board of Selectmen. They have oversight for the audit. They meet with the audit firm. They report back to the selectmen every year on the audit results and any issues. We do undergo credit rating. Our current ratings are AA1 from Moody's and a AAA from Standard & Poor's. Those are really great ratings for a small town like Westwood. And really a reflection on everything that the town does, our town meeting operation, our FinCom, and how we conduct our business. We do update that credit rating whenever we issue new debt. Just to take a quick look at some of the documents that we'll be using, we have 3 detailed books that we use in the budget process. A capital book, we do a 5-year projection of our capital needs, town and school. And I should have mentioned on that first slide, when we talk about any material, all of the town and school financial operations are all consolidated. We're on the same payroll system, general ledger, accounts payable, all of our reporting operations, our audit, all involve the town and school. So the capital budget book reflects all of the capital budget projections. It has a lot of information on our debt, prior capital, our assets, all of that. And it's what we use to kind of determine what goes forward each year for capital budget articles. Then we have a municipal budget detail book. That will come out in January each year, and those summarize the request of all of the various municipal departments. It has write-ups about what each department does, what's going on in their department, and then their requests for salary and expense budgets. And there's a similar document for the school department, where they produce a very detailed book summarizing their request for their annual operating budget. Again, a lot of narrative information that talks about what's going on and then lays out the requests that they're looking for the budget year. We then have a couple of summary books. One is the overall budget summary that will come out about February 1st, and that's going to give you the overall recommendation that the selectmen are putting forth for that year's budget. It's a pretty comprehensive book. This is the book here. It will have the budget that the selectmen are presenting for that year. It will have summaries from each of the detail book. So the capital summary, the school summary, and the municipal summary would be in here. It has all of our revenue and expenditure projections, and it has a lot of other overall financial information for the town. Debt information, where we stand with our reserves, our financial policies, things like that. So it's a really comprehensive document. Again, with the summaries from the other books, you really don't even have to look at those unless you really want to get into the nitty-gritty. This is the book that comes out on February 1st. It's going to tell you exactly what the budget is at that point in time that the selectmen are recommending to town meeting and recommending for you to start your review process. And then the town meeting warrant book. book. When you go through your process, when you vote your final recommendations on the warrant and the budget, you come out and produce a book, and we're gonna talk about that later. But that has the articles for town meeting and the recommendations. But it also has, we take all of this overall financial information from the summary book, and we also put that into this town meeting book. So you're required by charter to mail this town meeting recommendation book to every resident in town before town meeting. And we take advantage of that that's going to every house in town, and we kind of piggyback on, and we just put some financial information into the book. Take advantage that it's going to everyone. So really, about the last 50 pages of this book are really a real comprehensive look at the town's finances. It's really a great document. And I thought one way I could show you that is, this is my book from last year's town meeting. And I don't know if you can see over there, but it's taped, it's falling apart, it's dog-eared. I use this every day. This has everything about the town's finances. And people who I work with who come in my office, they'll say, oh my God, that thing's a mess. But I pick this up every day because it has everything. If I have to talk to my auditors, if I have to fill out information on issuing debt or whatever, everything's here. So I'm just showing you that just to kind of say it really has everything in it. It's a great place to read about the town finances. We try to really lay out things in the back, kind of simple one-pagers that you can pick up and take a look. A lot of what went in there is, as we had questions over the years, people would want to know something, instead of having to kind of pull that out and get that to them, we just put it in the book. And that's why it grew and grew. But there's a lot of information in there on the town finances. I use it every day. I'd be lost without this book. I just want to say that we have all of our documents are on the town's website, so everything's available, and we keep them from all of our prior years, so you can always go back and look. We send everything out by email through Jane. We send out all of those documents by PDF to the members, and then we always have hard copy available if you want or for certain committees. So if you're in the municipal subcommittee, we're going to print you a hard copy of the book. We would kind of just PDF to everyone else. But we're always open to, if you want a hard copy, we're happy to do that. We just try to limit how much paper we produce if people are fine with the hard copy. And then we have the final document is just that comprehensive annual financial report every year. Comes out in December. It includes our financial statements and a lot of other material that's really heavily used by our rating agencies when we undergo a credit review.
Just to clarify, Pam, when you talked about the budget books, the school department and the municipal one, at the point that those are produced, they haven't been voted on. So they could be adjusted somewhat before they, before town meeting, before we do our write-ups and all, because, presumably the school committee is going to discuss it, and they might make changes, and selectmen might agree it, so
Yeah,
there
at
will
that
be changes.
point in the process, they're definitely kind of proposed budgets, they're kind of the request. They're going to undergo review and public hearings before town meeting. Some years, there might be a lot of change to what's initially put out. Other years, there's not a lot at all. It just depends. Just a couple of quick things on the timing for this year's budget. So a couple of key dates. May 6th is our town meeting. That's when the town meeting votes approval of our budget for that next fiscal year, which starts that July 1st. We do have to have a balanced budget. Backing up from that, the charter requires that 90 days before town meeting, the Board of Selectmen produces the proposed budget. So we use February 1st as that date. So we're right around February 1st is when we're coming out with that initial presentation from the selectmen on what they're looking at that point in time for the budget for town meeting. Your final public hearings where you're voting your recommendation on the budget, the end of March. So those are the key dates and a little bit more detail on the bottom. Some of this Mike has gone through. But each year, early in the fall, we're going through financial information. We're going through how did our prior year close out, where do we stand with our financial information. In the fall, we're issuing that capital book. From the fall through the end of January, the selectmen are looking at the budget. They're going through revenue and expense projections. We do a 5-year forecast of our budget. Pretty much at every meeting from the fall through January, we have a little slot at a selectmen's meeting where we're talking about finances and the budget. So they continue to look at that right up until that February 1st deadline. They come out with the book, the summary book at that point in time. Again, some years, the budget that comes out February 1st, pretty much there's not a lot of change before town meeting. Other years there might be, just depending on kind of what's happening with that. When that book comes out on February 1st, right thereafter, we always come into your next meeting, and this year that's February 5th, and you're going to get a couple of presentations at that meeting. I'll go through the overall budget that the selectmen are looking at. Mike will present the municipal budget, and the schools come in and present the school budget. So you don't have to kind of go through the documents and try to figure out what's happening. We're going to tell you. We're going to say, here's what we're looking at for the budgets. How much of the budget's going up? What's happening with the taxes? What's happening with our state aid? Things like that. We're going to come in and kind of tell you all that right then in the early February timeframe. Then in March and February, you're doing your review, kind of reporting back out with your subcommittees in March. Again, those public hearings, you're required to hold public hearings on the budgets. That happens at the end of March. And when you finalize that, you send out your book to the community. May town meeting's voting on the budget. And we really don't close out that budget. So we won't close out the 2020 budget until the next fall. Because in the fall, the Department of Revenue is finalizing our values. They're finalizing our tax rate. And part of that tax rate approval process is they're looking at what voted at town meeting. They're going through the revenues. We have to submit what we're estimating for revenue and expenditures. In Massachusetts, the process is designed to be conservative. The Department of Revenue does not want a community to, at the May town meeting, overestimate or overinflate revenue projections and vote money for a budget, and then you don't meet those revenue expectations and you're carrying a deficit to the next year. We're basically just not allowed to have that happen. We have to be conservative with our revenue. We have to make sure that we're going to meet those revenue expectations and that we're only allowed to kind of vote and spend what we're going to have available. So when they set our tax rate in the fall, they're going through that process and checking. And that's why you really don't see in Massachusetts kind of communities going under or going bankrupt or whatever. You're really not allowed to. You're not allowed to kind of push a problem to the next year's town meeting. The budgets that we vote at town meeting really have to address a lot of areas. We have to vote the operating budgets, the annual budgets for the school and municipal departments. We have to vote our capital budgets. We have to have certain money in reserve accounts, just like you would with personal finance, so that we can maintain our credit rating. We have certain liabilities with pensions and OPEB. So we're trying to do all that, and we always have to balance it on what the tax bill impact is. So that's a really hard thing to balance, and those of you who have been on for a long time know that it's never easy. Every year the budget is hard to kind of piece together and to find the right balance of trying to do a lot and put a lot of services in place, but balance what we're doing with what we're asking the residents to pay in taxes. So every year it's a challenge. Just a quick look at a couple of our kind of main financial areas. This is next couple slides, things we show at town meeting. But this slide shows how do we fund the budget? Where does our revenue come from? And this pie chart of our revenue, you can see the taxes in the blue. Almost 80% of our revenue comes from our property taxes. We have a much lower reliance on state aid, shown in red, about 6%. This is a very typical pie chart for a suburban community in Massachusetts. If you looked at this chart for a large city in Massachusetts, you'd see something quite different. They'd have a much higher reliance on state aid. Some of the large urban cities in Massachusetts have 50 or 60% of their budget is from state aid. But for us, 80% of our money comes from taxes, and again, that's very standard for a suburban community in Massachusetts. That does make it a very challenging model to do what we just talked about, trying to get everything into our budget that we need to, because our main revenue source of taxes in Massachusetts is restricted by Proposition 2.5. We have a little bit of information on that, as that is our largest tax source, our largest revenue source. So Proposition 2.5 limits how much a community can raise in taxes each year. It limits what we can raise in taxes to a 2.5% increase over the prior year's taxes. It then lets us add in a component for new growth. So if a new commercial property or new residential property comes in town, we can pick up the taxes for that new development also. But pretty much that's it. We have 2.5% increase, we have new growth, that's what we can raise in taxes. Unless we want to go to the community and ask them to override those limits. And that's where you hear the term override. It's just overriding the formula. Two different types of overrides. One, a general override. We can go and ask the community for any amount of money for any purpose. It permanently gets added to the total taxes we can raise. For an override question to get on the ballot requires a majority vote of the Board of Selectmen, and then requires a majority vote of the voters to get implemented. The second type of override is called a debt exemption, and that's used for large capital projects. We can go to the community and ask for a building like the library, if they would approve paying for the library, paying for the debt on a bond we would issue to pay for the library, essentially the mortgage for the building, to approve the annual payments we make each year, principal and interest, outside of that, the property tax limits. It's a little different in that it's not permanent. You raise those additional tax dollars while the debt is running. When the debt ends, you're not allowed to collect those taxes anymore. So it's just the very specific debt amount each year. And that is something that when Department of Revenue is reviewing our tax rate, they look at that. They look at our debt schedules. We're only allowed to raise exactly the amount we need to make that payment. So we do have in the town meeting book, there's a whole history on every time the town has asked the town for an override, general override, or debt exemption override.
Yeah, and the 6% state aid, is that a volatile number, or is that?
It's pretty consistent for us. I don't have a slide tonight, but I do have in the book, we have a history of state aid. We have, especially over the last couple of years, not seen any real increase or decrease in state aid. It's just been a small kind of bumps each year. So we're pretty consistent at that 6% number.
I think George, during last year's session, raised the issue about federal funding potentially impacting that. So just curious to see if you've seen any change in that.
Yeah, when you look at our state aid over a number of year period, it's like a wave. When times are good, the state gives out a little bit more every year, and then when they have a budget crisis, they cut, and then we kind of start up again. In some ways, we're not as impacted to the state budget process as other communities because it's just not a lot of money for us. But it's certainly disruptive when it happens. The last time we had some really difficult finance is 2010, 2011. We had reductions to a lot of our revenue sources, including state aid. In some of the really bad years, if the state has a bad budget year, they cut us during mid-year. That's a real problem because we've already voted budgets, we're working on certain expectation, and then they've cut it. We have not experienced that in the last, 5 to 8 year period. It's been just pretty steady, no real increases, no cuts during the year.
Thank you.
I just have a quick slide, and I don't have to go through it, but this is the calculation of our tax levy each year under Prop 2.5. Just to kind of give you an idea of just how restricted and kind of formula-driven it is. So the table shows you our calculation each year. The column on the right is what we used for the 2019 budget estimate, so what we would have used going into last year's town meeting. The red circle on the top, 73.5 million, is where we start. How much can we raise in taxes? That comes from the year before. So if you follow the arrow down, the prior year's levy limit. So we can start at the amount from the year before, and then we can add to it. So as we go down, the little notes on the right say what we're adding. So we're allowed to add the 2.5% increase. That's about 1.8 million. We're allowed to add the new growth. We show that in two lines, kind of general new growth and university station revenue. So since University Station has come online, we've split out the new growth coming from that. So in our estimate for 19, we had a general new growth of $450,000. New taxes we were going to get from new development in town. And then University Station new growth, $200,000. The next line, if we had it, would be a general override. So we've not had a general override since 2007. But if we did, it get factors in there. And then that comes to your new total limit. So $76 million in the 2019 budget. The one final item you add on top of that is that exempt debt. So as I mentioned, any projects that you have voted outside of 2.5. So we currently have 2, the library and the high school. So in total for 19, $1.4 million in debt service for that year for those projects. And if you follow that shaded line back over the table, you can see that that fluctuates every year. It's very specific. So, $1,429, $505. It's very specific. It's the exact amount that we have to raise to pay for the debt service. So then just adding those two, the red circle, $77.4 million. That's the total amount that we're allowed to raise under Prop 2.5. We do want to, sorry.
So Pam, on that chart, University Station, so on an annualized basis, it's slightly about $5 million now, on an annualized basis?
Yeah, so going across each year, that's the new money coming in. So now in total, it's about $5.3 million in new revenue. That property was paying about $2 million before this development started. So we take in over $7 million in total revenue from that development, but about $5.3 million since FY15 when it came online.
So the new condominiums that are being built, will they show up as new growth? Or where will they show up in University Station, the 90 units?
Yeah.
That'll
So-
show up in new growth?
Yep, so the new growth is for new construction. If you just have new values, if your home value goes up, that doesn't get calculated into this calculation. But if a new house is built, or new condos, or a new business at University Station, that's considered new growth, and we get to add those taxes into this formula.
And then the last thing, what's the meals tax up to now? The restaurant meals tax?
Yep, so right now, we're taking in about $400,000 a year in the meals tax. And we do have a page in the town meeting book that kind of shows how that's come in over the last couple of years and how that's grown. But that's all come from what's happening down at University Station.
And you report on that when we meet in March, too. A lot of this information comes back to us with updated data as we go through the budget.
So 2 things we've done is, one, we've done that fall report to the Board of Selectmen, and that is now currently online. Happy to send it out to all of you, where we've gone in and said, how did we end our prior year, and where do we stand with different things? One of which would be the meals tax. How much have we taken in, what's in the account, kind of all of those different accounts that we have. So we have that. When we come in February 1, we're going to go through that again with you, go through all of that, and talk in terms of not only what are we using in that year's budget, but what's kind of out there in all those different areas.
And you're very conservative on your new growth, including University Station, so unless you absolutely know it's coming online in your next fiscal year, you wouldn't be reporting it.
Yep. So that's an experienced FinCom member making that comment. It's so important. That number, the rest of this is, we can calculate this chart out for the next 20 years. It's just a strict formula. In the budget process, the new growth is an estimate. We don't have those values certified until the following fall. So we're sitting here kind of right now, and then in February, going to present a budget to town meeting in May. The values are not certified, and the new growth not certified by Department of Revenue until the fall. So we just had the 19 numbers certified in November. So we have to be conservative, because if we overestimated those numbers and spent that money, again, if we allocated at town meeting, if we came the fall and Department of Revenue didn't certify the number, we would have to hold a special town meeting and pull back on budgets. So we have to be careful. So, for example, there may be a residential development or a commercial development that we think is going to happen during the year, and we want to get aggressive and build in the number, and then say it gets slowed down, whether by the economy or the weather or other conditions, if it doesn't happen, we'd be in trouble. So we're conservative in those numbers, and you can see that on the chart. The last column, the budget column, were estimates, and then if you go back over the last couple of years, those are actuals. So this chart gets updated with the actuals, and you'll see the difference. In that budget column, the second circle down, the 77.4 million, that's the highest amount that we could raise in taxes. Prop 2.5 doesn't say you have to raise that, it just says that's your ceiling. So you can't go higher unless you went out and asked for an override. That's the maximum. Doesn't mean you have to do it. So in our budget year this year, we were looking at actually assessing less than that, 76.9 million, leaving something called excess levy. So on a budget basis, it was 479,000. But again, if you run that back over the last couple of years, it's been about $1 million over the last couple of years. So what that is the selectmen saying we're not going to tax to the maximum that we could under Prop 2.5. And you'll, again, hear about that, and we'll talk about that in the presentation. As University Station dollars have come in, the selectmen have said, we're not going to use every dollar of that on something new. We're going to take some of that money and apply it to the budget. It leaves excess levy. It just means, we could tax more. So if people think their tax bills are high, they could have been higher. The selectmen are proactively trying to not do that, trying to be a little bit conservative and leave some of it. It also gives room for future things. It's a good financial tool to say we have additional taxing capacity if something were to come along that the community wants to do. So that's something we'll talk about further coming along. But just, we want to show people that, this 2.5, our main revenue source, is really restrictive. It's a formula. There's certain components to it. It is why it makes it difficult to do a budget, because this formula just relates to the specific formula put in place in 1980. Really doesn't relate to what you might have going on in town. You could have, 100 new school kids come in and you need a lot of new things in the budget. This formula here doesn't accommodate it, other than to say, if you need to go above this, you go out and talk to the community and ask for them to raise this limit.
So other than being very conservative, is there a reason that you think that new growth is going to drop so much, other than, over the last 3 or 4 years?
So on the two lines, on say the general one, we use 450 as our budget estimate every year.
Oh.
That's just kind of a number we use. It used to be about 300. We use 450, and then it comes in higher. And what happens is, if it comes in higher, we get that in our formula. It's unused in that 1 year, and then we pick it up the next year.
Okay, so it's not that you think something very different is happening this coming year. It's just that 450 is what you put in every year.
That's budget, the minimum amount we know we'll make from our normal residential growth and others. Really kind of the renovations and a couple of new homes going on in line. The University Station, you can kind of see when it first came on, FY16, 3.2 million. I mean, there were a couple of years when the project was really being built and coming online, it was very large. The same thing now, it's smaller amounts each year. We're trying to be conservative, and we're also trying to look at what pieces are going to come online in that particular year. So we never lose out on the money. It's going to come. We're going to have those tax dollars. We can use it in the formula for future years. In the budget year, we try to be conservative, and that's our estimate.
And 1 year, when we had a fall town meeting, we were able to catch the University Station money a little earlier.
And that's a great point, because we have our May town meeting. If we have a fall town meeting, that is before we get our tax rate set. So if we take any financial action at fall town meeting, it gets into that process. And that's exactly what we did that year with the University Station. It was so dramatic that first year. We didn't want to get caught up and estimate it in May and spend it and not have it. So we kind of told the May town meeting, we'll be back. We came back in the fall, we knew what the number was, and at that point, we were able to allocate it in the process.
But Pam, if you take 90 condominium units at an average price of around $500,000, 3 years down the road from now, when they're fully up and running, that may be quite a new growth bump, correct?
Yeah, and the only thing with that is, that will be taxed at the residential rate,
Right.
not commercial. Yep.
But an average house, $500,000 home generates what?
Like about 10,000 in
Right, so
taxes, yep.
90 of those would be very nice.
Yep, will be very nice.
Yeah.
Pam, just trying to manage the time. Do you think we can get through yours? I know there's a lot here. We will see more of it when you come back in February. Do you think another 10, 15 minutes is reasonable?
I can do the speed version, I will speed up. Yep.
No question.
The next slide's just on commercial taxes as a percent. We have our one tax bucket, some's paid by commercial, some residential. We'll talk with you a lot about this. It's just helpful for us helpful to residents when commercial is kind of paying a good portion. In the current year, commercial is 15.9% of value, but it's going to pay 26% of the total taxes in town because they have a higher rate. That is really important to residents. This is the actual look at tax bills for FY19. In green, our median home has a tax bill of just over $9,200. That would be over $10,600 if there was a single rate. So having the commercial tax at a higher rate provides about a $1,300 savings to every home in town, or 15% savings to the tax bill. Total expenditures, when you look at the budget, so in the current year, $98 million. That was about a 3% increase over the previous year. So here's where we're paying for everything, operating budget, our fixed cost, our debt, et cetera. But the biggest component is shown in blue is that municipal and school annual operating budget each year. It's the biggest piece of our budget. And this slide just shows the components of the operating budget. We vote that in one article at town meeting, $91 million. The bar graph shows the distribution from the different areas, school in blue, municipal in red. Really typical that the school budget would be the largest component for a suburban community like Westwood, almost twice what we're spending on municipal operations, but that is pretty standard as far as a suburban community with a high-achieving school system.
In that, does the municipal include the health care for the schools?
No.
It doesn't.
So the fixed cost in
Okay.
yellow, 14.6, includes the health care, pension, payroll taxes for all school and municipal operations.
Okay.
All of the employees. And just a super quick look, something that sometimes comes up on your warrant is the town borrows money. So how does the town borrow money? Town meeting has to give us the authorization to borrow money. It takes a 2/3 vote of town meeting to authorize debt, and that's because you are committing, once you authorize debt, you are committing future town meetings to repaying that debt. So it's a higher authority of approval than just the regular budget. Regular budget is a majority approval, but issuing debt is 2/3. As I mentioned, state law kind of dictates what we can borrow for and for how long we can issue debt. What are the terms of our borrowing? We can't borrow just to fund operations or for salaries or to fix a deficit. It's really for capital asset and long-term needs. If we were going to issue debt as a debt exemption outside 2.5, it also requires a vote at the ballot. So the library, we had town meeting approved issuing debt for the library, but it also required a vote on the ballot because we were issuing that outside 2.5. Other projects we issue debt, it's within 2.5, it only requires the town meeting vote. There's no law as far as which has to come first, as far as the election vote or the town meeting vote. The town meeting vote would have language in the article that says this requires a exemption on the ballot. So once town meeting authorizes that, the town treasurer is going to actually issue a bond. There's a lot of steps involved with that, but he has a public bond sale, we get a credit rating. He can combine lots of different debt authorization into one bond. We can do short-term before we go long-term, lots of things. He issues the bond, we sell the bond, we take in the proceeds, and then we enter into a repayment schedule, just like a mortgage. And then each year, the actual principal and interest amounts on the debt are included in the budget. And we have all of our debt schedules are in that town meeting book. And that's it. This slide has kind of what's outstanding in total debt. So just some of the things we'll talk about as we go through the budget with you. debt, taxes.
It's all
lots of
in the
good
book.
things. It's all in the book.
That's all you need to know, it's all in the book.
Great.
It is, that Appendix D and the.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
As always,
Thank
it's
you.
great. Any other questions, though, before Pam steps away? I don't want to curb discussions. We'll have more, I think, questions when she comes back in the spring. Thank you, Dottie, for coming to talk about open meeting law. I think this is important because it does come up here and again in kind of the process and the things that you manage with Jane behind the scenes. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, and I will try to consolidate and be quick, just go over some major parts. And as you said, the areas that I'm going to discuss are very important because by any violations that may occur in any of these areas, it could cause repercussions for the town. The open meeting law is, what it does is ensures transparency. It requires public bodies to give notice of meetings, open deliberations, open meetings, and public access. The basics of the open meeting law are notices must be posted for meetings. Meetings must be open to the public unless a public body enters into executive session. Minutes must be kept for open and executive sessions. And there's also public body member certification, which is new this year. And when you all were sworn into office, you received a packet. And every time you're sworn in, you've got to receive a packet. And I've left some handouts in the back. Open meeting law guide, and there's the Attorney General's, there's the open meeting law, and then there's a CMR. And there's also a certificate. So you have to sign a certificate every time you're sworn in. And also another thing that we have to give you is if there's an open meeting law violation.
Yeah.
The board has to be aware of that as well.
Dottie, quick question. Are the minutes for executive session public information or not?
If it's, if that would compromise what you went into executive session for, they wouldn't be. And what is a public body? And I know this has been a question a lot with your group to see if you've got to post your meetings and have them open sessions. A multi-member board, commission, committee, or subcommittee which is elected, appointed, or otherwise constituted and established to serve a public purpose. It includes any multiple member body created to advise or make recommendations to a public body. And it excludes the following, which I'm not going to go through, but there's also, you see it in your handout.
But Dottie, when a subcommittee of the Finance Commission meets with somebody, does that have to be posted as a, what's the requirement for that subcommittee?
So when are you talking about when you meet with like the school department or?
Or, yeah, whatever, they meet, the municipal committee meets with Public Works. If the committee is meeting with Public Works.
If you're meeting to get questions to bring to the finance group, no.
But if you're meeting
If you're meeting with the whole subcommittee, then you'd have to post it.
If our subcommittee is meeting with the superintendent to answer questions for the purpose of doing our presentation to the committee, we've always posted it, and that's correct, I assume?
Yes, yeah.
But so in other words, if the municipal committee meets with Todd to go over the DPW budget or what his issues are, they may not have questions, what his issues and concerns are, does that have to get posted as a public meeting?
It should get posted. Anytime your group is meeting to deliberate or make any decisions, and you're making a decision to bring back to your group, you should post it.
And what if a subcommittee has 4 members, what if only 2 members? In other words, I'm trying to understand what flexibility a subcommittee would have or not have.
Well, you still need to follow the rules. You still need to have a quorum.
Okay, so if quorum of the subcommittee, whatever that is, if that quorum meets with some official in town, that's got to be posted.
You're deliberating.
No.
If you're deliberating.
Yeah. If you're just
You're gathering information, you don't, but if you're gonna sit and talk
Exactly.
about whether you're gonna prove something, then you do.
That's exactly right.
We usually, as you know, let Jane know if we have a subcommittee meeting or whatnot, and then she takes the specifics and figures out if it needs to be posted or not, so we don't necessarily.
So right here, deliberation, if you take a look at this, so it's any oral or written communication, including electronic mail between or among a quorum of a public body or any public business within its jurisdiction. So it would exclude distribution of meeting agenda, scheduling, or procedural information, distribution of reports or documents that are to be discussed, provided no opinion of a member of the public body is expressed, subquorum if no subcommittee and no serial communication, and discussion of the recess or continuance of a town meeting in the event of weather-related or public safety emergency. So basically, we want to be transparent. So anytime you are going to have a meeting and you're going to be deliberating, yes, you should be posting that. Now, this is something that you should be aware of too, email and social media. So be aware of reply to all on emails. Limit the use of emails to scheduling purposes and try to avoid using email to undertake town business. Assume that email may be forwarded or to unintended recipients and therefore limit the content to business matters only. Don't ask for or express opinions, ideas, or beliefs in an email to other members. Alternative electronic communications are also Facebook and Twitter, which are also subject to open meeting law. Do not direct comments to other members of the body. If the matter directly involves issues pending before the body, consider not engaging at all. And be thoughtful about the manner in which comments are made.
So if a subcommittee is going to be meeting, education subcommittee is meeting the superintendent, and I send out an email and say, we're trying to set up the agenda, can you, we're trying to put together a list of questions, forward me your questions. So it's just questions, I'm not answering the questions, is to set up the meeting. That's okay?
That's fine. No deliberation.
Right, okay.
The actual meeting, deliberation by public body with respect to any matter within the body's jurisdiction. So your meeting excludes on-site inspection provided, again, no deliberation, attendance by a quorum at an event provided, no deliberation, attendance by a quorum at a meeting of another public body provided, again, no deliberation, and meeting of a quasi-judicial board for the sole purpose of making a decision in a adjudicatory proceeding, sorry about that, town meeting. Meeting notices, you must file notice with the town clerk, and the notice has to be posted in a visual manner to the public at all hours. So it's at Town Hall on our official bulletin board. We have it at Carberry Street Municipal Office Building and also on our website. Except in an emergency, it must be posted at least 48 hours in advance, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. The notice has to include the date of the meeting, the time of the meeting, place of the meeting, list of topics that the chair reasonably anticipates will be discussed. And the topic should be specific enough so that the public will understand what will be discussed. The date and time was posted if revised. So if you're making a change to your meeting notice, the date and time that the original notice was posted has to be on that, as well as the revision. And you should always mark your revised notice with red, any changes that you're going to be making in red.
And just to be clear, though, Jane does that for us. So
She does.
none of us would be posting meetings or this level of detail. Well,
Yeah.
we appreciate it. I don't want anyone to think
Be
that you
confused.
have to do that or should do that.
No.
You shouldn't.
That's right.
Okay.
And an emergency is a sudden, generally unexpected occurrence or set of circumstances demanding immediate action. And if you had an emergency meeting, your notice should be posted as soon as reasonably possible prior to the meeting. And Jane does do a great job with that, taking care of all that. There are some common concerns regarding notice posting, which I probably don't really have to get into with the board. Jane, I think you're comfortable with that. You may, maybe at the last minute, cancel a meeting, which that's fine to do. You don't need a 48-hour notice, but you Jane lets me know, and we advise people accordingly. Now, George, you did mention something about remote participation. So the Attorney General allows remote participation in certain circumstances. A public body member can participate remotely if the member's attendance would be unreasonably difficult. Our Board of Selectmen authorized the adoption of this in January of 2012, so that remote participation would be permitted for meetings of all local public bodies. However, they would like it to be an infrequent event. Are we stuck? Oh, here it is. Okay, yep. A quorum of the body, including the chair, shall be physically present at the meeting where somebody is going to be remotely participating. The member of the public. Oh, one page ahead. Okay, sorry about that. Procedures for remote participation. So you must notify the chair at least 48 hours in advance, and the chair makes the decision to allow or not to allow remote participation, and that shall be a final decision and not appealable. Remote participation is allowed by telephone, internet, satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing. Prior to the meeting, the chair shall make every effort to ensure the equipment is available and functioning properly. If the required equipment is not available, then the chair shall deny the request for remote participation. And you have to also make sure that documents have been distributed. So the person that's participating remotely has all the documents. At the start of the meeting, the chair has to announce the name of any member who will be participating remotely, and that will be recorded in the minutes. I'm really trying to push this ahead. Okay. So I'll just try to go through this real quick. Quorum of the public body includes the chair, including the chair, shall be physically present at the meeting. Members who participate remotely and all persons present at the meeting shall be clearly audible to each other as required by law. All votes shall be by roll call vote. Members may participate remotely even if they are not qualified to vote. Remote participants shall preserve the confidentiality of an executive session if you happen to go into executive session. The remote participant shall state at the start of any such session that no person is present or able to hear the discussion. If any technical difficulties arise, the chair should suspend the discussion while efforts are made to correct the problem. If you can't correct the problem, then it has to be noted in the minutes, and the member shall disconnect and be noted as absent. Do you do executive session?
No.
Do you have okay, so we can just skip this. Minute meetings, this is something that, Jane, you're responsible for. Do you want me to go through this, or is it necessary?
I think we got it.
Okay. And the only other thing that I do want to bring up, though, is if somebody were to ask you for minutes, you should create and approve the minutes in a timely fashion, and they should be available within 10 days. If they're not available approved, then you should give them in draft form, and what you should do is make a notation on the minutes that it's a draft subject to revision. Great.
10 days after the meeting or 10 days after the next meeting when you could approve it?
Well, within 10 days. That's
Okay,
part of the.
because we only meet once a month, so.
Right, so then what you would do is you would give those minutes out in draft form.
Okay.
Open meeting law complaints, again, have you ever had an open meeting law complaint?
No.
Okay. So basically, it's explained there, and the complainant will let the chair know in writing if there's been any violation of the open meeting law.
Dottie, so if you inadvertently have violated the open meeting law, what is the correction? Do you notify somebody and say, oops, we didn't post or do something properly, but we're telling you about it, or what do we do?
Yeah, so what happens is somebody makes a complaint, and so as a group, you're gonna look at the complaint and.
No, it's not a complaint. Say somebody.
Violation.
I made a mistake. I communicated with somebody, or I talked to 3 committee members, and I said, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. What's the corrective action?
Well, that would be something on you. So if you talk to another board member outside of a meeting.
Right.
We'll talk to town council.
Yeah, I would talk to town council about that.
Manage it. I think
And they
our
would
rule of
advise
thumb
you.
has been to communicate to Jane, and Jane
Right.
disseminates across. That's kind of been
Yeah, I
our
mean-
best practice. That's worked well, but if someone makes a mistake, we could figure it out.
It just always be aware,
Yeah.
you know, when you're outside of your meeting, just, so you don't want to get yourself in that position.
I'm just saying, but for example, you're in a meeting, and all of a sudden you inadvertently deliberated when you shouldn't be deliberating, which is, can
Right.
happen. So people say, oops, who do we notify? Say,
And that's, as Howard said, I think that would be the best policy, is notify town council, and they can advise you. Public records, and this is another thing that Jane will take care of. So the public records law changed quite drastically in January of 2017. There's a records access officers in different levels that we have. I happen to be the super RAO. And so basically, we have 10, when somebody puts in a public record request, we have 10 days to respond to them, not including Saturday, Sunday, or legal holidays. And we do a great job with our public records requests. We also have a place on our website. We have a online public records request database, FOIA Direct, and, we manage that very well. Ethics obligation, this is another obligation mandated by State Ethics Commission, and I'm sure you're all aware, maybe the new people aren't as aware, but every 2 years, any municipal employee, board, or committee member has to complete a conflict of interest law online training. We do keep track, and we let Jane know if people have to, once their 2 years is up. And then when you've done the training, you'll get a certificate at the end that you are going to download and send to me, send to Jane, and your obligation is good for 2 years. It's per the public record law, we have to retain those certificates for 6 years. Every December, you'll also get a summary of the conflict of interest, and I've left some copies here for everybody to take. And what you're going to have to do, this is what the summary looks like. You can read it, and at the end of the summary, there is an acknowledgement that you can fill out and send to me, send to Jane, or you can just email me saying that you've received it, and that will suffice.
You need all of us to do that?
Yes, everybody has to do that. And, feel free to contact me if you have any specific questions. There is a lot with the open meeting law. I could be here for hours answering questions and just discussing everything. But, the main thing is take a look at the materials. And also for public records, everything is online on the town's website. You'll find anything for ethics, for open meeting law, everything is on our website. And if you want to know more about public records and just what the guidelines are, there's a sheet in the back, and there's also questions, additional, feel free, you guys all know how to reach me, just shoot me an email.
And if there's an issue that's come up, we're not sure if we should recuse ourselves from a vote, should we just go right to the ethics board, or should we talk to you first?
So you can talk to me, and most of the time, if there's something that you're not sure about, they'll want you to call them directly. But if it's a disclosure, you're going to want to file that with me. If you have to disclose something that may affect, your decision on the Finance and Warrant Commission. Okay, thank you for your
so
time.
much, Dottie.
You're my favorite person to tell me.
Thanks for clarifying.
You're doing a damn good job
Have
with
that from
kids.
the get-go. Good one, Mike. Thank you all. This has been a tremendous amount of work outside of your day job, so we really appreciate it. And Pam, I didn't mean to cut you short. We could have listened to you for 6 hours and again, and it's always so helpful. You break down complex information very simply, so I appreciate it. 2 other quick things, and we'll be done in 3 minutes or less. Jane has a fun trivia. Come on, Jane.
And Pam.
And Pam.
And Pam. Dottie, will you do me a favor and just click that last slide? So just what we really wanted to talk about the book, the most important thing is,
that's me.
especially for new people, what you'll see as we go through this process starting in January, the enormous amount of work that this board does. And you can't underestimate how important. When I first started, somebody said to me, I think I was in a meeting or something, and somebody was like, you know that book that nobody reads? And I was like, wait a minute, I think I know what you're talking about. And it really isn't true. A ton of people do read this book, and everybody knows whoever got stopped in Roach Brothers to get asked questions about what's in here. But the most important thing is the tremendous amount of work that you do is reflected in the article writing, and I think Julie really wants to talk to you about in January. As soon as we know who the sponsors are going to be, you're going to get assigned articles, and it will give you the opportunity to really hone in on that information. And so that's, I think, at the end, we're in a real crunch, and it's really important to get the work done, but we can't underestimate how important the work is that you're doing in the articles that you're writing. For new people, when you do start writing articles, we have people who are particularly good at writing them, and I have a ton of resources in terms of we can pick out what articles were very successful, and you can use those as examples. And the other thing is, when Pam held up the books that she uses every day, and literally, like, every time I go in there, it makes me laugh because, you know, the pages are so worn. The back of the book, and Pam and I have sort of talked about this, I don't know if we do a good enough job highlighting what's in the back, because anything anybody in town wants to know about our budget process is here. Everything is here. So we're kind of talking about maybe highlighting that better going forward, and I'd love your input to anything that you think about how we manage this. We did just a little trivia, and I think it's up there, that we thought you might find kind of fun. You know that the delivery deadline for the annual report, I think our moderator told us it's 7 days. And although it wouldn't impact our ability to vote at town meeting, people really are looking for the book as soon as our public hearings are done. So it's really important. And I think at the end, you're so tired from everything that, with the public hearings, and this is such a crunch. I just, I can't reiterate enough how important it is that the work is so important, and people are looking for the books. Who gets a hard copy? The town of Westwood, we don't have to do this. The books only have to be distributed from our charter to every, the residents of every voter, but we send it out to every household, and we also do the post office boxes. The only thing we don't do is commercial addresses. So we want to make sure that everybody gets it. We order a ton of hard copies for town meeting, and we also now, as soon as the book goes to the printer and it's been approved, we put it right out on the website, so people don't have to wait for the hard copy for people who are looking for it electronically. This year, for 2018, we sent out 6,594 books, and I think at the town meeting we had so many attend last year. It was the first time since I've worked here, but Dottie goes a long way back. We had no books. Usually we deliver books back to town hall, and we only had I think I have maybe 50 books left. So they really got used last year.
You could give Pam 2. So.
I give Pam as many as she wants. And Pam have a couple of just places that we talked about. The moderator page, and Jim may change that. This is his first year that has traditionally held all the information about motions and indefinite postponement. And when people say they don't really understand that has really served as a really good, it's one page, and it's a good snapshot of what some of those motions mean and how they have to be carried out by law. And another question I get asked a lot is who determines the order of the articles in the book and at town meeting? And that is the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator. And they are responsible for the order for both the how the articles are at in our book and how they are looked at town meeting. And then Pam had just a couple little trivia for the back of the book. What's the average tax bill in the town of Westwood, and where you can find it? And that's, this year, it's on page 65 in this book, and it was $9,121.
Just a comment on that.
Yes.
People have heard me say this in the past, that that almost chews up, for people who deduct taxes, the entire SALT deduction on your federal taxes. And I've said this to the head of the schools, that I honestly think that's going to affect the way people think when we probably have to go for an override in the schools, because it's going to be for certain high net worth. I think something like 50% of the residents of this town pay more than $10,000 in property taxes. So I think the thinking of what's going to happen when we go for an override for the schools is going to be very, very different, because people are no longer going to say, well, for every $1,000 I can deduct $300 or $400. Can't do that anymore. I think it's going to affect people's thinking. So I think it's something we would very, very need to think about in terms of how you approach debt overrides.
I think it'll be very telling after, we have to wait for this tax year, and people actually see what the impact is.
Right.
But some towns are not, some people aren't worried about that. Let's see what the 401k is tanking.
Do you want to finish up the last couple, then we'll do the minutes?
Yeah, I'm going
Go
to
ahead.
do
Yeah.
Just to take, this is probably the most important for the operating budget, that it's what we vote on at town meeting, and that is where you can find that in the book. And I would encourage new folks to take a look at that when you have a minute. In our book for this year, it's Appendix B, and it's 91 million, and it's on page 46 to 52. And I would really encourage new folks to really take a look at that. That's the snapshot of what we vote on. And then the last one is, what's the town total debt outstanding? And that answer you can find on page 92, and it was 44.7 million. So there's, as you know, for new FinCom people and people who've been around a long time, there's just a ton of financial information that would be helpful to you to get a look at before we start in January. It's really good information to have. And just one more comment that I wanted to make. When Pam went through this sort of the timeline of the budget, there, as she told you, there's a ton going on still in January, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to call the financial people before that budget is done at the beginning of February. That's why we're set up the way we are. Although we're interested in getting those numbers in January, it doesn't make sense because they're not complete. So, and that has been a question in the past. So love the book, people.
Thank you. That was great. One item, does anyone have any new business? We have minutes from our last meeting to approve. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Mike, thank you.
George, second?
Yeah.
All in favor?
And I have
Okay.
corrections. There's a correction under the Director of Energy update, the fourth bullet. It throws in Flayhaven, and I'm not really sure. It should be, we retrofitted Westwood High School twice. And it's then what about the multipurpose field for light retrofitting? So, okay. So right now it says we retrofitted Flayhive at Westwood High School, twice? And that's not really, yeah.
Okay.
So we have to go back?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll leave that for the next meeting then. We can't vote on it.
Yeah.
Any other business? Do I have a motion?
The
Oh,
only other thing is, I've included, I know you have tons of information here, but the schedule, the FinCom schedule, it's really, really important, just so two people know that, for you to be here if you can be, or we can talk about remote also. But you have the schedule now, so as you look ahead in your very busy schedule, all the dates are here and they're in stone. So I just wanted you to have a hard copy of that as well.
do we need to do a photo?
I would love to do the photo if people can manage that.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Have a good night. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks, folks.